Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today I'm going to show you how to put TrueNAS on this, the Flashstor Flashstor NAS. This is their M2 NVMe optimized NAS. It's either the 6-bay or the 12-bay 10GB version. All of the steps I'm going to go through today will work on both this, the 6-bay I'm holding it, and that 12-bay. Also, every step that I'm going to go through today will also work for TrueNAS Core. So whether it is you're going for the new shiny Linux version or you're going for the old school Core version, whichever way you look at it, TrueNAS Core, TrueNAS Scale, you are covered in this video. Straight away, ADM on this is a decent enough software platform, and you've probably already started using it with your Flashstor up to this point with a bunch of media inside. Bear in mind that what you're going to be doing when you're changing this to a TrueNAS Core or TrueNAS Scale system, by doing so, you are opening the door to the drives inside being reformatted in that new NAS OS. So if you care about the data that's on board, make sure you have a backup. You should have one already, but have that data removed from it. You don't necessarily wipe the SSDs unless you choose to, but if data is on this that's important to you, remove it. Also, what we're going to show you today is reversible. So if you want to just remove the drives, pop them on a shelf, pop in some new ones, run TrueNAS on this bad boy, and then later on revert back. You can just turn the device off, remove the drives, put in the old drives, and later on in the video I will point out how to reverse everything we've done today very, very quickly. The other thing I'll talk about, Flashstor have been one of the few brands that have actually been quite flexible on the subject of installing third-party OSs. On their own channel, they've got several guides on installing not only TrueNAS, but several other third-party NAS OSs on their system. I will allude to them later in the video as well with a link, and of course they'll be linked in the description below. But it is worth bearing in mind, however, that what you are doing is outside of Flashstor's own support network. So if you bugger things up on this system, you're kind of on your own, and again we'll allude to that later on. The last thing I'll talk about is what you need for this installation. Obviously, we need this NAS. We've got our Flashstor NAS here, that Flashstor 6 over there, but what else are we going to need? Well, we're going to need a keyboard. You can use a mouse, although you're probably not going to need it. I've not included one here, but you can get hold of a USB mouse if you want. And next thing you're going to need is a monitor, an HDMI monitor. For me, I'm not going to be using an HDMI monitor. I'm going to be using a USB to HDMI capture card. That's going to allow me to record what I'm doing today. But for you, you're going to need a visual output. You're going to need that monitor. And next up, you're going to need a USB key. I'm utilizing the one that we've used a bunch before, this little SanDisk number, because it's a micro USB, and although this doesn't have a usable internal USB port, the only one that's inside is for the fan, at the very least you can still utilize a small USB here for the installation at least, and therefore it's not going to take up too much room. You're not going to use this long term. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is optional, because this is something that has been talked about online, and it's a very flexible subject, and that is to do with the boot drive. Because although inside this I've got this populated with 6 Team Group SSDs, these are the T-Create drives. They supplied us for these Flashstor videos. Thank you so much, Team Group, for that. These drives, again, we've got another couple of videos of those coming up soon. Those drives I've pre-populated inside here, but there might be a chance that you don't want to use one of those as your TrueNAS boot drive. That's right, the OS on TrueNAS needs to run on its own a drive to run from it, much like the SSD or the hard drive, or 2023, that you're running Windows on right now. Now, there is a small flash module in here that runs ADM, or at least for the initialization and the bootloader of Flashstor's ADM software. You do not want to use that, and later on I'll show you how to disable that. But most users, and indeed if you go to TrueNAS's own pages, talk about USB drives being used for the installation, but when it comes to the actual boot drive, that you shouldn't use USB drives because they're just not up to task for the constant IOP actions there, but also the constant write and reuse. Now, you can use a USB drive as a boot drive. You could get another USB, pop it in there, use it as a boot drive. I wouldn't recommend that, but you can, and you can get some fairly rugged USB drives out there. Alternatively, you can go for a larger USB drive, perhaps with a more industrious hard drive inside that's up to the durability standard as your TrueNAS boot drive. Alternatively, you could get an affordable M2 NVMe, pop it inside a case and use that as a boot drive. But having your boot drive connected via an external connection doesn't feel great to me. So although in this video I'm going to be installing TrueNAS on the M2 NVMe's, I'm going to use one of the 6 available bays as my boot drive and the rest for storage. You're not locked in on that. You can choose to use an external drive. Just make sure you go for something rugged. Make sure you go for something that can take the durability and has the performance levels for you. Because you would, much like I said, if you try to run Windows these days off a standard hard drive, the performance is going to be pretty much dog mess, and don't be surprised if getting a lower performance or lower durability drive to boot TrueNAS from will have similar impact on your usage. The last thing I'll touch on is memory. System arrives with 4 gig of DDR4 memory by default, this one here, and TrueNAS has a recommended minimum of 8. And a recommended, overall usage of 16 gig. I'm going to be utilizing just the standard 4 gig there, but it is recommended you go ahead and upgrade the memory. This system runs on an Intel Celeron, the M5105, and that CPU has a maximum recommended threshold of 16 gig. We have exceeded that number in other testing, but the stability of that and how much it's actually usable is up for debate. But you can at least get up to 16 gig there. So I do recommend, if you're going to be taking this seriously and you're going to be utilizing your Flashstor as your TrueNAS server moving forward, maybe upgrade that memory to 16 gig. So those are our components. Let's begin the first stage. Let's get our USB ready for our TrueNAS installation. What we need to do is get our USB and pop it inside our machine. Let's flick over to the PC now. So we've got this crummy little USB in the corner here because I'm starting to run out of USB ports. Let's bring the mic over. And here we are back. So now we're running that here in the background. Let's flick over to the desktop. As you can see, first thing we're going to need is TrueNAS. And again, we're going for TrueNAS Core for this installation, but as mentioned, you can use TrueNAS Scale if you wish. Again, you can go directly to the download link in the description, or you can go to their main pages and you'll find it very, very easily. So once you've started downloading that, it will download. It's quite a chunky little file. As you can see, I've got it all downloaded in there that we can use. I've already done it prior to this video. The second thing you're going to need to download is an application known as Rufus. It turns USBs into basically boot images. So instead of utilizing a CD running from an optical disk drive, you can boot it from a USB using a digital image, that ISO. Again, it's free. You can download a portable version that can just run directly from any device or install it on your system. I've already done so. It's completely free. Do, maybe chuck them a donation from time to time, who knows. So moving away from that, the first thing we will need to boot up is indeed Rufus. We'll find Rufus there and we'll go ahead and run our copy of Rufus. So when we got Rufus there, the first thing you'll see is it's immediately recognized that USB drive that I've connected. Now, if you're having difficulty finding the drive on there, one of the things you can do is just go into, type in the word disk part on the bottom left of the screen, select disk part. You might see a black screen because of Windows rights and recording the screen. From there, type in the word list disk. If your USB is at least visible, then you'll see it then. If there's any reason, multiple partitions, maybe the drive hasn't been initialized or given a drive letter yet, there's lots of reasons why it might not appear, but at the very least you'll know that it's visible there. And you can go ahead, if it has got data on it, you can select that drive. So in my case, select disk 2, and then if I choose to, I can just type the word clean. And if I clean that drive, it will completely remove everything from it. It'll be a surface level clean, but it will clean that drive. And if you still can't find your drive, go into PC, open up the top bar here, and go into Manage, and go into Storage, Disk Management, and your drive will appear here. And you can right click, format, give it a letter, so it will appear on the screen. There's lots of options. Or alternatively, you could just put Disk Management there, and just select Manage Disk and Volumes. It's that straightforward. So now we've got access to our USB. Now what we need to do is create our image. So from there, we're going to choose to create an ISO image there. So we select, find TrueNAS as we've done earlier on. Click Open. Again, it's going to be an ISO hybrid. This is to be expected there. And again, you can leave pretty much everything as default here. Remember, this is the drive we're going to use to install TrueNAS. This isn't our boot drive. This isn't like Unraid where we're creating our initial loader. Okay, so from there, click Start. It will warn you that the drive will be formatted. You probably should have known that by now. And from there, we can go ahead and begin that creation of our TrueNAS USB there. So I'm going to leave that to do that on screen. I'm just going to give it a few seconds, fast forward to the completion. Now that's done, we're going to safely remove our USB here at the bottom. So we close Rufus, go to the bottom right of the screen, and we're just going to go ahead and remove our drive, nice and easy. There we go, we've got our USB drive and we're good to go. So what I'm going to do now is get everything set up here for the next stage of the installation. So let's fast forward a couple of minutes. Okay, so I've connected everything up, and as you can see here, we have got the Flashstor NAS on the rear here. I have connected the power here, getting ready to click the power button on the side. I've not started yet. We've got the HDMI that for you will be connected into a monitor, but for me, it's running into this capture card on the laptop. And finally, we've got our USB keyboard connected here. All that's left to do is insert our USB, our boot drive that we've just created there, pop that in the front. There we go. So we got that all good to go. And the next step is going to be getting ready to tap this trusty F2 key here. So what we want to do is get ready, click the power button, and then we're going to make our way on to what you're going to see on the HDMI. Let's go. Okay, so we've pressed that button there. We should see something here in the middle, and get ready to just tap that F2 key to make our way into the BIOS that we see here. Now, earlier on, I did mention about the internal SSD, that kind of eMMC board there that has the ADM software on board. And thanks to Flashstor's own video, they did highlight a nice, easy way to disable access to this. Now, you might want to do that just in case you accidentally overwrite the ADM software on board. Now, if you're outside of warranty and it's years from there in the future, maybe you're thinking, I'm going to use that to put my OS on there. I'm not too certain about the performance of that internal SSD, so I wouldn't even recommend it then. But for the rest of you, certainly, I would say to make sure that you don't overwrite the ADM installation inside that installer, I should say, not your actual installation. That'll be on your drives. Go ahead and go into the Advanced tab, go into Advanced, the Intel Advanced menu there, then go down, all the way down to PCH-IO. From there, go down to the SCS configuration, and then from there, click there and click Disabled. And that means that drive now, there's disabled access. There is a lack of access, I should say. And from here, we can start making our way back to that primary menu. So back on that original primary menu there, the next thing we need to do is head over to the boot menu. Highlight the USB drive that we know has got our TrueNAS installation and press the plus symbol to move it up in the boot order, because that's what we need. We need to make sure the system boots from that USB for the very first time. So once you've done that, and again, if you're running a CD or another kind of connected drive, you can select those from the options. For example, there are all of our connected Team Group T-Create SSDs. Next, head over to Exit, click Save Changes, and there you go. We've now saved that USB drive is going to be the next boot drive. We will be coming back to this page later on for those that want to reverse back to ADM. More on that later on, but for now we can go ahead, click F10, and we can save and exit, and from there we're going to allow the system to reboot. The reason being that when it reboots, we're going to reboot into our lovely Unraid installer. Click enter before the time runs out, and now we can start running into installing TrueNAS from the bootloader onto this device, I should say. Right, so the first thing we want to do is obviously we're creating a new installation. Click enter, and as you can see, it is highlighting that we're using less than the recommended memory, as I discussed earlier on. So if you do get used to this setup and you quite like using TrueNAS on your Flashstor system, then maybe consider upgrading that memory somewhat. Again, it uses DDR4 memory. I believe it goes up to support of 3200 megahertz. I think it arrives with at least 3200 megahertz memory by default. I'll have to double check that, but for now, we can continue. And from here, you can see a list of connected drives. Now, remember earlier on when we talked about installing a USB drive or utilizing another drive as your installation drive, this is where you're going to have to make that choice. Now, going back to what I mentioned earlier on, if we disable that there and head back into our window, there's been plenty of discussion online over the years about whether you should use a USB drive for your boot. And indeed, they do cover this in their own video over at TerraMaster. TrueNAS themselves do not recommend it. Again, if you are going to go down the road of utilizing a connected USB drive as a boot drive, go for something with some durability. Go for, as mentioned, a nice M2 SSD or even a SATA M2 as a connected drive in an external casing there. But again, with a USB drive, having your boot drive as an external, I'm not too sure. But for me personally, I'm going to go ahead and use one of the drives here. Click space in whichever drive that you want to use for your installation. And now this drive will no longer be usable as storage. It's only going to be used for booting and running TrueNAS in the background. So for now, I'm good. We click OK. And it lets you know that it's going to have to erase all of those partitions. From there, we've now got to pop in our password. Again, it's quite straightforward. Whichever one you're happiest with, go ahead and pop it in there. For the next option, I would select UEFI for this. It's a relatively modern motherboard then. Again, you're going to have no difficulty in terms of support. Next up, you can decide whether you want to create that swap partition. Personally, I'm going to say no, just for the sake of this installation, but do consider that for yourself. You might need it there. And from there, it is now going to start the initialization and creation of that. So it's going to run that there in the background. And the installation has completed there, so click enter. And what we want to do now is shut down that system. The reason being, we want to have sufficient time to remove that USB drive. So go ahead and reboot that, shut down that system, I should say. Allow it to shut down and make sure to remove that USB drive once that has completed. And the next time we're going to boot this device up, it's going to be booting from the internal drive media there. So we can go ahead, remove that USB. So now we're rebooting without that USB included inside there. We're not going to touch any keys. And the first thing you're going to notice is it's reading all of those different drives trying to find an OS drive. So we can go ahead and skip that there. Again, later on, we'll reselect our drive. And now, as you can see, rather than installing TrueNAS, it's now inviting us to boot TrueNAS. We don't touch anything because it will boot straight in this way. Now, later on in the video, towards the end, I will show you exactly how to reorder those boot drives, but moreover, how to reset things if you need to. But the other thing worth highlighting is everything you've seen up to this point has been via the HDMI output and with a keyboard. But you want a NAS. You want to be able to access this thing remotely, right? So make sure at this point to have a network connection into that device. Have a network cable connected into your Flashstor system, either into a network switch or directly into a client machine. You'll know that it's worked because the system will tell you there that the web interface is good to go. Once we've connected that network port there and we've restarted the system if we choose to, or we can just reconfigure the network interfaces there with the command, we're able to get our new IP there. And we're no longer going to need this keyboard because now we can head over that IP ending 201. We can now head over to my local web browser, as you can see there, and as you can see 192.168.1.201. there is our login. Again, the root login will always be known as root, although you can change it, and enter the password you created earlier. And boom, we now have our TrueNAS interface here running on our Flashstor NAS system. And from here, we can go in and start creating our storage pool, start creating our shared storage. We can do the works. And you can see, create a new storage pool. There are the other 5 M2 NVMe bays there, which if we choose to, we can go ahead, sling them all into a lovely little RAID for us there and do more. And again, give it a name. We'll call it NVMe pool. From there, nice and simple, and again you can choose the redundancy levels, have it all pulled together whatever way you see fit. And ultimately, that is how we put TrueNAS on the Flashstor. But I did say I would show you how to reverse everything here, and in order to do that, we're going to need to shut the system down. So we're going to shut the system down, and we're going to return to our KVM, our keyboard video mouse type setup there with our keyboards. We're going to go back into OBS and re-enable that as the system shuts itself down. And from here, what we're going to do is wait until the lights have gone out. And again, we're not going to need our USB still. We don't need that at all. You only need that if you need to re-establish the system. And we're going to boot the device once again and start tapping F2 to get back into that BIOS menu there. So if you have already decided which TrueNAS drive you want to use and you want to make sure the system doesn't, start going for all the connected drives, you can go ahead, find the drive that you assigned as your boot drive there and start playing around with its order and start moving it around. Alternatively, what if you want to go back into ADM? What if you want to revert things back to ADM? Bear in mind that if you do that, the data on those disks that you may have used, or those SSDs I should say, that you've used in TrueNAS, they're probably going to be formatted either completely or possibly, depending on the configuration you use in ADM. So remove those and reinstall the drives that you want to use with ADM, and then head over to exit and then load setup defaults. What that will do is reset everything back to the way it was. If you don't quite trust that, you can do it manually. Just remember to go in Intel Advanced menu, go into PCHIO configuration, go into SCS configuration and re-enable that eMMC drive where ADM installer lives, and from there reorder the boot drives if you wish. Make sure that goes back to the top, and then from there you can either choose to save changes, or as I say, just go straight into load setup defaults, click enter, and now everything will be back to the way it was. But this has been how to install TrueNAS Core or TrueNAS Scale on the Flashstor NAS system. I hope you found it helpful. As I say, there are other guides available online. If we go ahead, while not accidentally removing the HDMI output there, we can see that not only have they started providing guides in their own channel for third-party OSs, but they've covered this subject as well, so do check that out. Apart from that, again, there'll be links to everything you need to download, including using advanced IP scanner as well. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.